All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam, and I'm going to be telling you how to effectively present your designs today. But first, let me give you some background about myself. So I'm Sam. I'm a UX designer at North Star. I actually will be starting that Monday. My last day at my last company was yesterday. And I've been a UX designer for about 5 years. I spend a lot of time working with like heavy data applications, and I think that's like my area of expertise. I can get into that a little later, but basically complex design flows and complex challenges is my niche. I got started in UX in 2018 with a boot camp. I finished that up and then I worked freelance for about 6-ish months. That freelance kind of translated into a longer term freelance gig. I worked on a contract with this company called Scripps out in Dubai. And that was like a really big opportunity for me to build up my UX skills and work on something really, complicated. It was a healthcare app. But then I switched over to working at Flatiron School where I taught UX design for a while. And then after that, I moved on to a company called Form Assembly. Form Assembly is a Salesforce enabled tool. It's enterprise level form creation. So again, it was like I said, complex data. So that's kind of been my trending niche throughout my career. I took that and I moved on to Reonomy, which is where I was until yesterday. And there I led design for one of the squads that handles all property data. Since Reonomy is a commercial real estate data model and web application, property data is pretty intense. We have about 55 million properties. So I was focused on making sure that users could access that in a simple way. And then starting Monday, I'll be leading design at North Star across some new areas of their product. I've yet to find out what I'll be doing, so we'll see how that goes. But I want to segue that into like presenting your designs is a key component of being a good designer. I would say that it's useful across the board. When you're applying for jobs, the ability to present is often what gets you across the line. Making sure that the other people in your interviews or in your presentations during interviews understand your ideas, understand your designs in a simple way helps them judge the quality or ability that you have. Beyond that, when you're in a job, when you're working, and you have to present designs to people higher up than you, typically product managers or executives, knowing what they want and how to present to them often allows you to get the go ahead and trust to push forward on new ideas or designs that you might have come up with. So it can be very useful throughout your career. So I'm going to start off with a couple of points that I think are key to making a good design. So first and foremost, when you create or start your presentation about anything really, but as it relates to product and product design, providing context is huge because oftentimes we present to people that might not have enough context into how we've designed or how the product has progressed on a day-to-day level. So when you're speaking to PMs, they're focused on overall strategy. When you're speaking to executive levels, like C-suite executives, they manage higher level expectations and higher level things than you do, but their ideas and their understanding of what you're doing impact how far you can go and how the product roadmap lives. So providing context enables you to discuss and like exhibit the goal of your design and the process in a really good balanced way. Talking about things like team makeup, this is especially useful when you're presenting in an interview when they might not know who you've worked with. Providing that context of how much of the product or how much of the design you've actually done, giving an overview, very quick overview of the project, what it was, what it tried to achieve to do, and a simple one-sentence explainer of like what the product is at all helps move the conversation beyond basic contextual questions. When you don't do this, what ends up happening is people are inclined to ask this stuff because you haven't provided that context. That's been my experience, kind of the learning that I've had. interviewing at so many places, but I've noticed that giving these questions or giving these answers upfront allows them to ask you questions about the design and the choices you made, and a little bit more complicated, complex questions that you might want to answer, but you probably wouldn't have been able to get to if you're answering just contextual questions. So a good example of something like this is like when you're starting a presentation, say one of your projects is presenting Airbnb or it's a redesign, right? How would you explain what Airbnb is to someone that might not know, right? Make it really simple. Like here, so Airbnb is a platform that connects people looking for a place to stay with people offering a place to stay. That leaves out a lot of things in terms of how it works internally, but that's really not the point. It's really just about providing a base level of understanding that you can then develop on top of. And then the next thing to do in tandem with providing context, and what providing context actually helps you to do, is controlling the narrative. Oftentimes when we create presentations or create designs and you present them without a clear framework on how you're going to approach it, people will ask questions about things that might not be in scope, might not be stuff that you want to talk about, might not be stuff that the focus of the conversation really should. I found this to be pretty true in some of my jobs when I was working at Form Assembly. Anytime I present stuff, a lot of the conversation would shift to font choices and like back-end stuff, when I was really just asking like, hey, does this flow work? So focusing your presentation helps you get the right answers you need to progress forward in a job. But controlling the narrative in an interview setting or a setting where you're presenting to others that might not know about your design or project keeps focus on the stuff that you've done. Example of this is like when I've tried to present my project at Scripps, which is really massive healthcare stuff. My role there was really just designing the iOS app, but I always felt in the past that not providing the whole context of what that platform does and what it aimed to do, like on all sides of the coin, wouldn't really work, because I thought that people would understand it. What I actually did eventually find out was that providing that context, but then saying, hey, like my role here was really just about the iOS design. And so I'm going to focus on the features and the designs that we created to tackle that area of the problem. And when you do that, people tend to respect that, and then they'll ask you questions about that, which is what you want to happen. And so making sure you think through really simple arc, even though you're working with something that you might feel is very complex. A simple arc of a problem, a solution, and an end result really helps. If you can frame that up with some contextual slides at the top, and then present your problem, your research, and then your solutions, and then what ended up happening at the end. Really just like following that kind of framework helps you create points of narrative that you can then control and like kind of focus around. And the next one is knowing your audience. So I've been kind of alluding to this throughout the presentation, but knowing who you're presenting to is really key. If you're presenting to a PM, know that they are really wondering about how your design meets their product roadmap or product goals, overall goals for the company. And if you're presenting to users, they necessarily don't care about all that stuff. What they want to know is, how does it affect their workflow? Will it improve or negatively impact that? And so you want to always frame that up in that way for them. If you're presenting to a hiring manager, really it's just about a broad understanding of what you've done. So making a presentation and then saying like this should work for everything is never actually the case. When I designed for work, I ended up making slides really focused around KPIs and how I hit them, especially when I'm presenting to PMs or anyone that really doesn't have day-to-day involvement in the design process. When I present to users, I pick user flows that I want to research and I want to understand, and then I keep it entirely about that, because there's a high probability that user will try to deviate from what you're showing them to problems that they're having currently. So making it really easy to follow along for them and keeping them on track is like a key component of that. And with hiring managers, like I've said throughout, provide context, make sure they understand at a very base level what your design is trying to achieve, and then move forward from there. And like we were saying earlier, so configuring or controlling the narrative, all three of these things go hand in hand. So understanding who you're presenting to, providing them context, the appropriate context, and then controlling the narrative from there on helps you present effectively. And then the next one is just keep it simple. I don't know if you noticed with this entire presentation, I didn't really spend too much time putting all of those points onto the presentation itself, because when you do something like that, you end up reading from the presentation, and that's not what you want to happen. Typically, the presentations should serve as a basic understanding of the slide for the observer, and for you as a prompt to speak more in depth about each of those points. All right, thank you guys. I can answer questions if you have any questions, but we'll. The present. I hope it was good. On reusing presentations but adjusting it based on your audience strategy. Honestly, you know, I've tried to do that before, and the real problem with that is because the presentations are so like targeted, especially in a working environment. You can't necessarily do that. So like if I'm making a presentation about KPIs and stuff, that stuff doesn't matter to developers. Honestly, the like core factor, like they don't care. They really care about how much time it takes to build stuff. And so your presentation is there when you're speaking to them, or like your, you know, development squad, has to be about expediency in terms of like how quickly can they get this done, and what resources have you provided them to get that done, and like where can they go to find this stuff. But for PMs, it's like, hey, how does this hit our KPI of like 21 million ARR by the end of the year? How does that help, or, you know, detract from that, or do we have to adjust expectations? So you can never really make the same presentation for everyone, but if you keep it simple, making a presentation shouldn't be a daunting task. Like it really just needs to be core points, and then you speaking and learning to speak effectively through that. And then when you're speaking to hiring managers, really like my portfolio deck for interviews is maybe 2 projects. I have more than that, 100%, but I keep the 2 projects because it lets me keep it really straightforward. Limits the options in terms of like how much time I can spend. Either I do 1 project and they ask for that, or I do 2 because they haven't specified. And then 2 projects allows you to kind of pick ends of the spectrum of your abilities. So I wouldn't say use the same presentation everywhere. I usually like make work presentations pretty targeted. So if I have presentations work, I keep it there. I don't personally. So do I often find it effective to add in videos or GIFs, prototypes in progress? So I do actually do that when I'm presenting to people that don't know about the product. But when it comes down to PMs, people who run and use the product on a day-to-day basis, or like kind of work with it, they don't need that. I don't think it matters. I've never actually made a prototype at work. I'll be frank with you guys. I've never done that. So I really just like put screens on slides and then said like, yeah, this is what this screen is going to do. We're going to reuse these components, and this is how it's going to function. It should take this much time. It'll hit this KPI. And then when it comes to presenting to people that don't know about your product and have, you know, probably don't have a chance of using it, yeah, it makes sense to do that. Then I'll mock up some prototypes in Figma, record it, put the GIF onto Keynote, and just play it, and then talk through each step. So when I present my project scripts on my portfolio presentation, I have GIFs of each flow that I'm saying is a solution to some problem that I've surfaced in you know, earlier in the presentation, and then I walk through how they connect by just talking over the video. And I think that's a really effective way to, you know, move the conversation forward. It depends. I mean, print presentations, like in what context would you use those? I feel like digitally speaking, like you have a lot more versatility in who and how you present with. If you ever end up going to an office to actually present your work as a candidate, don't take a print presentation. I think it'll be hard. Just take your laptop with the keynote presentation and pull it up. The other thing I actually want to add to that too is do not ever just present anything from Figma. Do not ever try to present from your website, because those are not optimal formats to present or create a presentation. Figma provides way too much of a window for you to use. And Keynote lets you kind of focus on just what you need to put into the slide. Your website is a hard thing to present. Websites are just hard to present in general. So just, find the right format for it. I found really Google Slides or Keynote are the best way to get across your point. Cool. You can make slides in Figma. There is a pitch deck studio plugin for Figma, but what I find with that is that putting videos into Figma is just a much harder thing to do. So if you're doing kind of interactive elements, presentation software often just has a much easier way to, like if I just record, like screen record with QuickTime, my Figma prototype of me walking through it, I can just drag that video into Keynote. But with Figma, I'll have to upload it to YouTube and then have pitch deck parse it and then put it into the file. So think about how much time you want to spend doing that kind of stuff versus using a tool that's kind of ready made to help you do that. So presenting things creatively or uniquely really just comes down to how effectively you can talk about them. It doesn't matter how creative something is if you don't really approach it with a simplicity. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive. I think the best example of this is to think of Steve Jobs. It's like a really good example of this, but something that people really just don't talk about is that oftentimes the products that he does present and show the world are really unique at times when he did, like presenting the iPhone or the iPad or the iPod. At the times that they were presented were unique objects, and his presentations in the background were so simple. And mainly he did that to evoke a point and then follow through with the way that he spoke about it. And I think that combination is how you present creative subjects or creative products effectively too. So I actually don't think you should be providing some sort of README doc. There's a format of a slide that really works well. So one thing that I do in my presentations is the first slide of any project, I give a product image shot. So helping them see what the end product was. And that's where I give the one sentence, explainer of what it is. And the next slide is who I worked with and what tools I used. And then the next slide is something called what, why, impact, and scope. So those four things together really help, I can think sew up to provide context piece. So when I say what, it's really just an expansion on the one-liner explanation I gave at the beginning. And then the why is sort of kind of alluding to sort of the problem space that we existed in. And then the impact is what we expect it to happen, like what we expect to happen when this launches. And scope is how long it took us to get there, or to how long it is going to take us to get there. So that serves kind of a de facto README, because that's kind of the basic contextual information that people ask you if you don't provide that. A good presentation lets the products or skill sets presented speak for themselves. Then yes, 100%. Because if you don't need to state, I made this in Figma, or this is what it looks like, and show all these really amazing mock-ups of anything. I actually don't do that. I have one of those at the top. That's because I want to entice interest at the beginning. And then the following slides are really just really simple screen recordings or screenshots of the work that I've done. Any other questions? Okay. think we still have 5 more minutes. I can try to show you guys an example if you guys want. All right, so this is my portfolio deck that I use when I have the portfolio stages of any interview. I start with an intro, like I did with you guys, and then I kind of present projects. I have 3 here because I added the properties page project that I did recently. But I kind of go right into it, really. So this is that slide that I was telling you about. This is kind of where I give an introduction of what Scripps is very basically. I give them something to work with, to understand visually. And I say Scripps is like a combination of Epic for hospitals and Apple Health for users, but it's put together. And I move on from that. And then the next is, like I told you guys, team and scope. So I present my role, the team that I worked with, and the tools that I used. I don't actually go beyond just like kind of reading what this was. I say like I did the patient app. The patient app is specifically for iOS. And then I go to say do the what, why, scope, and impact stuff that I was telling you about. The what is kind of an explanation or an expansion of my one-liner introductions. Then I go on to say like reimagining healthcare management. So like healthcare management systems are Epic, from a rigid administrative system to a patient-centric platform. I explain the why. It's kind of a truncated version of my problem statement that I get to eventually. So scope is pretty straightforward. You know, it took 1.5 years when it released, and then what it did. Impact is basically like who used it and how many people did. And so this is kind of what I was telling you about keeping it simple. You could do a ton with the research-oriented stuff a bit. Like you guys have a ton of documentation. I'm sure like a bunch of interviews, you know, all this like secondary research, all those different like matrices that people create and all the charts and all that stuff. But realistically speaking, you just need to show people some points to validate why your problem exists. So I talked through maybe 5 or 6 key points that we pulled out from our research as problems that we think that patients feel when we're designing the patient app. So I just walk through each of them. I kind of expand on everything. So if I say like, you know, one of the points of frustration for patients is that they don't have like access into their medical history. And so that, you know, that creates a consistency issue where they have to go between multiple clinics or hospitals that, you know, to get their fragmented data. And this often is linked to inconsistent diagnosis throughout their life cycle in the medical system. Same thing. And then this is a summarization slide. So pain points are basically every single one of the key problems that I listed. I just summarized them, and then we kind of linked them very, you know, basically with beliefs that we think that patients hold. If you're to pick apart the things that I had in the key patient problem slides, they're actually just like pieces of that we just separated to kind of make it easier to understand. And then this is what I show as a distilled problem from all of that. Even though there's more research involved in everything, there's more context. Like we had like so many documents on all of this, and so much research that we did, interviews that we conducted. But I made a choice to truncate it into something really easy to understand and follow linearly. And so this is the distilled problem. And then I go into the workflow in which that problem exists. Again, cool. So a clinical workflow in a medical environment is so complicated. There's so many steps, 100%. I mean, like there's steps that a patient is not privy to. So I could have made the choice to just put up the entire workflow and say like look at this thing that I work with, it's complicated. Look, I can do this stuff. Or I could say like, hey, since we're just talking about the patient, I'm going to show you just the areas in which the patient interacts with that clinical workflow. And then I was able to make that choice. And then I was able to, you know, simplify how that looked. This diagram that I have is immense, it's huge. And these are like maybe 4 parts of 150 steps that exist in that. But this really helped me get my point across to whoever was like listening to me. So I'd say that, a patient goes through typically like 2 doctor's visits, history of present illness review. One time they get a prescription, sometimes, one time they get a diagnosis. Sometimes if they need more, data to conduct a diagnosis, they'll have a lab order. That is the actual touch point of a patient in this space. And then, I show them those steps and I say, these are the things that will help them communicate better in those touch points. And so then I say, like, these are the features we prioritize based on all of that information and that research that we conducted. And I walk through each feature. So these are videos. So then I'd say, like, hey, this is your home page. You'll have like medication intake reminders, but then you also get a little notification that you can book a doctor, type in whatever you want, find a doctor, look at the reviews, and then scroll back up and then pick a date or look at their details about where they studied, achievements, maybe sort of like LinkedIn, where they're located. And then you can go back and then book for a date. And when you do that, it'll pull up our booking flow. Then you can choose who it's for, confirm the information, and then add a reason if needed, a health profile if needed, and then you'll see your booking and you can confirm it. So I think that's way more effective than showing like thousands of like static slides. It gets the point across quicker, and then I can move and I can reuse that format for each of the features and kind of get through it. And so when it comes to things that are hard to show in videos, I do just use screenshots. These are like just different areas of the app in which dashboards exist throughout. They're not necessarily related, but they are kind of a commonality in that they present a lot of information at once. And so then I walk through some of the main areas of those dashboards. These are, they're videos, but I just scroll through the thing to kind of give whoever's watching an understanding of how much it would actually contain. And then same thing here. And then I go into like any changes that would have been made with testing, any iterations that we worked on, and then that's where I end that. Typically, the questions that I get after this fact are like more about how I worked with the team, how I worked with the developers, how any changes we made affected our users. Those are the questions you want to answer, because if they ask you questions about like, oh, but like, how did that feature work? I mean, where was the researcher data for that? That's not getting you anywhere. That means that they haven't understood your product or project or design. But when they ask you about the steps of after your design, how that went, I think that's a successful presentation in that case. Let's see. Sorry if I find my cursor. Okay, so that's one. The next, I do the same thing, guys. The difference between that one and this one is that this is for the web. So I like to show, a variance between my skill sets. I can design for mobile. I can also design for the web. I can also do completely different areas of focus or areas of industry. And I think that's like one of the most powerful things about the way that I set up my presentation, is that it communicates that without me having to say it or verbalize it, because it's just shown. And I follow the same steps. Once you create that template, it helps. This is like based on business decisions, and then the script's just like kind of a 0 to 1 product. We were kind of creating the business around it. This is for an existing business, so we had KPIs to work with. So I listed the KPIs. We had an expansion KPI that meant we needed to achieve this revenue target by the end of year. And then we had like a retention target of increasing customer retention. And then we had product to platform target of switching from just being a product that you use in conjunction with a platform to being a platform ourselves. And then I went into users that we might target. So typically, when you look at enterprise products, they have three sets of users, three types of users, really. So you have the business user, the people like typically using the product on a day-to-day basis. You have their managers that create the requisition requests to buy the product. So they're the people you're selling to. And then you have the people experiencing the product as a customer of your customers. And so you're designing for all three of them. And that had to be said mainly because I think that communicates a knowledge of like how product road mapping and product management works, especially when you get to like a mid-level role in any company. That's kind of the expectation, is that you understand that. So that's why all of this stuff is in this part of the presentation, and not really like anything about data, because this is a good enough reason to develop a new product. Beyond what our users are saying, this is just a good reason. And so then I do the same thing. I show a video of our current offering, and then I walk through all of the steps, and then I talk about the issues that it does have, and then solutions that we have to those issues, and then an overview of the new products that we built. It's really simple stepping, and it gets people there really quickly. So once you've done that, you just walk through all the different steps, how it works. And since this is live, I just recorded the website of this working. So that was really easy. But then I just talk about any challenges or learning that I had. This is a little bit different when you have a product that's already kind of existing and you're adding features on top of it. So having said that, the next one is just like this. So I'm gonna answer some questions now, if you guys have any. Yeah, so, that's a good question, because there are this was a really terrible design decision, I think. But what's nice about it is that because it's terrible, it gives you like a visual reason on top of the actual like maybe product, underlying information architecture, underlying usability issues, to see why you would want to improve this. So it kind of helps you create that base level reasoning for it, and helps them understand that too. So I think having bad products and then making them visually better, along with being like just generally better in terms of structure, helps your narrative generally. Yeah, showing that kind of growth is useful. You don't have to like denigrate it. It's not like you have to say that this is a terrible product. You just kind of, people understand that intuitively, I think. Even if they don't initially, when you show them something that looks a little bit better, that functions a bit better, and kind of tackles the issues that you're stating exist, then that understanding develops pretty organically. It's not something that you have to outwardly state at all. And so I wanted to add, I built all of this in Keynote. I mean, I could use Figma 100%, but it would have been way harder to do any of these videos with Figma. So think about the product, like I said, think about the products that are made to create presentations and what they offer over products that are not. All right, guys. Thank you for having me. If you guys have any other questions, please just ping me on Discord. I can definitely answer them, provide some examples if needed.
Thank you for speaking.